You thought that after a long day, your home would welcome you back with peace. But the moment you opened the door, everything changed. Boxes blocked the hallway, your living room was rearranged beyond recognition, and there she was, your sister-in-law, sitting on the sofa as if she owned the place. The key you had entrusted for emergencies had been used by your father to move her in without a word to you. In that instant, you realized betrayal often comes from the ones closest to you. And that was the moment your revenge story began. If you enjoy dramatic family revenge stories filled with shocking twists, gently tap like and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. You stood frozen in the doorway, your pulse pounding in your ears. The house that had always been your sanctuary now felt like a stage set for someone else's play. The sight of boxes stacked high in the hallway, furniture pushed out of place, and your sister-in-law comfortably claiming the sofa told you that life as you knew it had shifted without your consent. But before this invasion, before the betrayal that greeted you at the door, there was a story of sacrifice, resilience, and the fragile hope that family could be trusted. This house was never just a house. It was a dream carved out of years of discipline. For 6 long years, you and James lived like students long after you had graduated, cutting corners, cooking simple meals, and saying no to nights out so you could save. When friends traveled to Europe, you stayed home. When colleagues bought new cars, you drove the same old sedan. You worked overtime shifts and took freelance projects, clinging to the vision of one day holding a key that opened a door to a place that was truly yours. When that day finally arrived, the memory etched itself into your bones. Signing the deed, the lawyer sliding papers across the desk, James squeezing your hand until it hurt, you both cried openly. It wasn't just relief. It was triumph. Stepping across the threshold of your very own 3-bedroom craftsman-style home, you felt something you hadn't in years. Permanence. Here, you whispered to yourself, no one could dictate your choices. Here, you would be safe. You poured yourselves into the details. The granite countertops, once only admired in glossy magazines, gleamed under the soft kitchen light. The stainless steel appliances reflected your faces as you laughed about learning to cook something more ambitious than pasta. The backyard, though small, became your refuge. You planted basil, rosemary, and tomatoes, kneeling in the soil after long days at the office. Every herb that sprouted reminded you. This was yours. Every corner, every object carried the weight of effort and the promise of stability. But stability, you learned, is fragile when family doesn't respect boundaries. Your father, Walter, was a man you loved yet struggled to navigate. Since your mother's passing a decade ago, he had filled the silence with control. His way of showing care was to intervene, often uninvited. At first, giving him an emergency key seemed harmless. James traveled for business, you sometimes left for client trips, and having someone to check the plants or pick up mail was practical. But the key became more than a safeguard. It became an opening. There were the unannounced visits. Your father just in the neighborhood, close quote, appearing at the door with grocery bags or unsolicited advice. There was the chandelier he replaced without asking while you were on vacation. You returned home expecting to sink into the comfort of the familiar, only to find your chosen light gone, swapped for something he preferred. There were the times he invited friends over, settling into your living room as though it were an extension of his own. And there were the constant reminders that, in his eyes, your expertise even as a financial advisor never surpassed his own instincts. He sent articles with notes like, you should really consider this approach instead. Then there was Vanessa, your sister-in-law. If Walter embodied control disguised as care, Vanessa embodied entitlement disguised as need. From the day you joined the family, she hovered like a shadow, her presence never far, her opinions never absent. She told James which neighborhood you should choose for the house even though her choice would have doubled his commute. She critiqued your wedding dress and tried to swap your floral arrangements days before the ceremony. And when she didn't get her way, her tactics were predictable. Tears, accusations, and carefully crafted performances of victimhood. At Christmas, she declared she would stay at your home for 2 weeks in January. When you gently explained you already had plans, she cried before the family, framing you as the villain. Another time, she borrowed your car without permission, drained the tank, spilled coffee, and laughed when you raised it. That's what family is for, close quote, she said, as if your boundaries were a joke. Each time, you told herself it wasn't worth the fight. That family harmony was more valuable than drawing hard lines. But each silence was a cut, each compromise a seed of resentment. And yet, you held on to the sanctuary of your home. Within its walls, you and James found refuge. Even when Walter pushed too far or Vanessa spun another scene, closing the door at night meant safety. Or so you thought. The day you walked into your living room and saw Vanessa acting as though she belonged, that illusion collapsed. It wasn't just the rearranged furniture or the boxes marked baby items stacked against the wall. It was the betrayal written between the lines. Your father had used the key, the very symbol of trust, to conspire with the one person who had made your life most difficult. Standing there, you felt years of moments cascade back. The chandeliers swapped without asking. The car borrowed without care. The friends invited without permission. The holiday tears, the laughter at your expense, the times you swallowed your voice to keep the peace. Now, all those moments had converged, spilling into the very heart of the one place you thought untouchable. You clench your fists, not from anger alone, but from the recognition that this wasn't an isolated act. This was a pattern reaching its peak. The people who should have honored your boundaries had trampled them instead. And in that moment, as Vanessa smiled casually from your sofa, and Walter adjusted curtains as though he lived there, something shifted inside you. This wasn't about politeness anymore. This was about reclaiming dignity. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the ones closest to you, the ones who believe love gives them permission to disregard your voice. You didn't know it yet, but this was the moment your revenge story truly began. If you've ever had to protect your space or stand firm against family pressure, you know how powerful and painful that decision can be. Tap like if this resonates, and subscribe to follow the rest of this family revenge story, where every twist brings you closer to justice. The silence in your chest was soon drowned by noise, Vanessa's voice floating casually through the living room, the scrape of furniture legs against hardwood, the rustle of boxes being opened, as though this were just another moving day. You blinked, struggling to comprehend, but reality pressed in. Your father had acted without hesitation, and your sister-in-law had embraced the role of guest-turned-tenant without shame. When you demanded an explanation, Vanessa smiled with a softness that was almost mocking. "Oh, you're home early. Don't worry, we just moved a few things. I'll only stay until the baby comes." Until the baby comes. 2 months, at least. The words clanged in your ears. Your father stepped down from the ladder where he had been hanging blackout curtains over your windows, his face a mixture of self-righteousness and irritation. "Now, don't overreact. This is family. Vanessa needs us. Brian abandoned her, and she can't be alone right now." It wasn't true. You knew it. Brian hadn't abandoned her. He'd stepped away after an argument about money, something couples argue about every day. He was planning to return. But Walter chose to believe Vanessa's version, or perhaps he didn't care about the truth. In his mind, helping her without asking you was an act of nobility, and questioning it was selfishness. The words selfish and irrational spilled from him more than once that night, each one chipping at the trust you had clung to for years. You stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who had once tucked you into bed with the man now standing in your living room, dismissing your right to control your own home. Vanessa's performance, as always, was seamless. Her eyes glistened with tears the moment you raised your voice. One hand pressed protectively against her belly, she whispered, "I knew you'd react this way. James said it would be fine for me to stay. Where else can I go? Do you want me and the baby to be homeless?" Close quote. Homeless. The word was a dagger meant to paint you as heartless. You clenched your teeth, knowing full well she had countless options. Her own parents, her sister with a large house, her circle of friends. But she had chosen you, chosen your home, chosen the drama, chosen the chaos. And your father, blinded by his own need to play savior, had chosen her side. Over the next 24 hours, the invasion deepened. Vanessa filled the bathroom counter with bottles of prenatal vitamins and creams. The kitchen cabinets, once neatly arranged, were suddenly overflowing with her teas and snacks. A fold-out bed dominated your living room, the rug rolled away, the coffee table shoved aside. Each corner of your home bent to her presence. By the time James returned from his business trip, the transformation was undeniable. He had expected a suitcase or two. Instead, he found a complete relocation, a living room turned nursery, and his sister speaking as though this was her rightful refuge. "This is more than I thought," close quote, James admitted, his voice heavy. "But she's pregnant. I can't just throw her out." You swallowed your frustration. "No one is talking about the street, James. She has places. This isn't about helping, it's about respect." They used the key without asking. They rearranged everything. They decided for us. But James, torn between brother and husband, faltered. He pleaded for patience, begged for compromise. "Just a few days," close quote, he said. "Let things cool down." Those few days stretched into nights where Vanessa controlled the television volume until past midnight, her laughter echoing through the halls. She invited friends over for breakfast, using your dishes as if they were hers. Walter dropped by daily, carrying yet more boxes, nodding at you with the air of a man convinced he was doing right. The final straw came when you discovered the lock on the back door had been changed. Your key no longer fit. Walter had upgraded the security, he said, and would give you the new key when you started being reasonable. The message was clear. This was no longer your decision. Your sanctuary was slipping away. Inside, your emotions spiraled. Anger burned at the betrayal. Sadness pressed against your ribs, heavy with the realization that the two people who should have respected you most had chosen instead to undermine you. And fear whispered in your ear, fear that James' wavering would allow them to stay indefinitely, fear that your silence would erase your right to your own home. Each confrontation ended the same. Walter insisting that family doesn't need permission. Vanessa crying that stress is bad for the baby. James caught in the middle, torn between loyalty and love, his voice shaky as he tried to calm both sides. You felt like the villain in your own house, blamed for demanding the basic respect of being asked. At night, lying awake in your own bedroom, you stared at the ceiling and wondered, when did love become permission for violation? When did family become a shield for entitlement? You remembered every compromise, every moment you had swallowed your voice for peace. And you realized that peace had never been theirs to grant. It was yours to claim. And though you hadn't yet decided how far you would go, something in you hardened. You would not let this continue. Because when family turns your sanctuary into their playground, when respect is traded for control, silence is no longer survival. Silence is surrender. If you've ever felt pushed aside in your own story, or seen your boundaries ignored by those who should honor them most, you know how deep that hurt runs. Tap like if you believe respect is the foundation of true family, and subscribe to see how this family revenge story unfolds, because the fight for your home has only just begun. The days that followed blurred into a storm of unease. Every morning you woke to the sound of cupboards opening and closing, of unfamiliar voices drifting from the kitchen where Vanessa had invited yet another friend, of your father's footsteps echoing through the halls, as though he were the landlord rather than a guest. The very air in your home felt different, heavy with the scent of someone else's belongings, the disarray of a space no longer yours. The turning point came when you opened the drawer of your desk, searching for a document you needed for work, and discovered a handwritten list. At the top, scrawled in Vanessa's looping script, were the words, "Baby registry items nursery at Olivia's house." The list stretched down the page. Crib, rocking chair, dresser, shelves of clothing, and dozens of supplies. It was not the list of a temporary guest. It was the blueprint of someone laying claim to permanence. 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 The blueprint of someone laying. Your pulse quickened as you scanned the page. She had not just moved in. She had planned to root herself here, building her child's first months in the home you had sacrificed to create. Worse still, she had written it as though your consent were relevant. That night, your father returned with yet another box. Inside were tools. You watched from the hallway as he installed something on the back door, his shoulders squared with grim determination. When you tried your key, it no longer worked. Confronting him, you demanded an explanation, and he replied with the casual arrogance of someone convinced of his own righteousness. "I upgraded your security. You'll get the new key when you start being reasonable." Your breath caught. It wasn't just intrusion anymore. It was control. A line had been crossed so boldly that the house itself no longer felt safe. James saw the fear in your eyes that evening. He slumped into a chair, his face drawn with guilt, realizing too late how far things had spiraled. "This has gone too far," close quote, he whispered, his hands covering his face. "I thought it would be a few days, maybe a week. But they've taken over." Together you tried to confront them, but as always, the responses followed the familiar script. Vanessa, with practiced timing, clutched her stomach and spoke in a trembling voice about stress and the baby. Walter, standing tall beside her, accused you of being cold, of turning your back on family, of choosing selfish comfort over compassion. Each time you pushed, they deflected, their words heavy with manipulation. It was during one of these confrontations that Vanessa announced her plan with startling boldness. "Actually," close quote, she said, her tears drying almost instantly, "I was thinking I'll stay until after the baby is born. The nursery isn't ready at home, and with Brian being so unreliable, I need somewhere stable." Your jaw tightened. Until after the baby. That meant months. Months of your living room consumed, months of her presence stretching into every corner of your life. Walter nodded firmly beside her, as though her decision carried authority over your own. The room tilted with the weight of disbelief. This was no longer an argument about temporary shelter. It was a full-scale takeover. Sleep became nearly impossible. At night, Vanessa sprawled on the sofa bed, the television blaring until past midnight. Your father stayed late, sometimes nearly until dawn, carrying in more of her belongings, as though he were fortifying her claim. And in the darkness of your bedroom, you lay awake, James beside you torn and silent, while the house you had built slipped further out of your hands. You began noticing smaller, insidious changes. Vanessa rearranged the shelves in the kitchen to make room for her teas and supplements. She hung her clothes in the hallway closet. She stored her bags of baby items in the spare bedroom, ones meant for your future plans. Every trace of her presence was a reminder that your voice had been erased. One morning, you walked into the kitchen to find her friend Pamela sipping coffee from one of your mugs. The counters were covered in pancakes, fruit, and parfaits. Vanessa greeted you cheerfully, as though it were her home to host. "We're just organizing the nursery corner," close quote, she said, waving toward the living room. The words sent a chill through you. A nursery corner in your home, as though it were hers to decide. The argument that followed with your father was worse than any before. You demanded your key back, your voice shaking with the force of anger barely contained. He refused flatly, his tone cutting. "Not when you're being this unreasonable. You don't understand what family means. When I was growing up, we helped each other. No questions, no conditions." His words landed like stones. To him, boundaries were selfish. To him, respect meant obedience. And in that moment, you realized there was no convincing him. He did not see you as an adult with rights over your own life. He saw you as a child refusing to follow orders. The confrontation reached a peak when Vanessa waddled into the hallway, hand on her belly, accusing you of cruelty. "He's been nothing but helpful," and you're shouting at him. "Do you even care about your own nephew? Do you want me to lose this baby because of the stress you're causing?" Close quote. The manipulation was so transparent, yet so effective. James faltered again, his face pale as he begged for calm, caught between his sister's tears and your fury. But deep inside, something within you shifted. You had tried negotiation. You had tried patience. You had tried to appeal to reason. None of it mattered. They had no intention of leaving. They had no intention of respecting you. And as you sat on the edge of your bed that night, the house quiet for once but heavy with the echo of all that had been said, clarity settled over you. This was no longer about compromise. This was no longer about waiting it out. This was about survival, not of your body, but of your dignity, your marriage, your very sense of self. The list in Vanessa's handwriting. The locks changed without your knowledge. The boxes stacking higher with each passing day. They were not guests. They were occupiers. You stared at the ceiling, your hands clenched tight against the sheets. The fear had burned itself into something sharper, something colder. A line had been crossed so far that there was no way back. And though you did not yet know the exact shape your next step would take, you knew one thing with absolute certainty. This war for your home had only just begun. The house had become a battlefield, but battles are not won through anger alone. After the night of Vanessa's announcement, her plan to stay until after the baby, the silence between you and James grew heavier. He sat at the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped, his eyes tired from nights of tension. You could see the war inside him. His instinct to protect his sister against the undeniable truth that his marriage was collapsing under the weight of her intrusion. The next morning, you found Vanessa rearranging the spare room, humming softly as she folded tiny onyxes into drawers she had dragged from storage. Your father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, as though guarding her kingdom. When you entered, both looked at you with a confidence that chilled you. It wasn't defiance anymore, it was entitlement, a certainty that this house had become theirs to manage. You turned away, retreating to the kitchen where James sat staring at a mug of untouched coffee. You placed the baby registry list in front of him, the one you had found days before. His eyes scanned the page, and his expression shifted from denial to alarm. "She's planning to stay for months," close quote, you said, your voice steady. "This isn't temporary. This is permanent, unless we stop it." James didn't argue. For the first time, he nodded, the weight of realization sinking in. That night, he called Brian, desperate for clarity. On the other end of the line, Brian's frustration boiled over. "She told you I abandoned her. That's a lie. I've been staying with my brother because she refused to talk things through. I never agreed she should move in with you. I never agreed she should drag your father into this mess." The words confirmed what you had known all along. Vanessa's version of events was designed to manipulate. But having Brian's voice added strength to your resolve. With James finally on your side, you began to plan. It wasn't revenge in the way people imagine, loud, destructive, fiery. It was methodical. You began documenting every intrusion, every change, every piece of evidence that showed how your trust had been violated. The lock replaced without your consent. The boxes piled high in the living room. The written list of nursery plans. The messages Vanessa sent to friends, inviting them over without asking. Your father scoffed when he saw you taking notes, shaking his head with disappointment. "You've changed," close quote, he muttered. "Your mother would never have treated family this way." The words stung, not because you believed them, but because they revealed the depth of his blindness. He had chosen to see control as love and your boundaries as betrayal. Tension escalated. One evening, you returned home to find the dining table covered in baby shower decorations. Vanessa and her friends were stringing pastel-colored banners across the ceiling, laughing as though this were their home. Your father supervised from the corner, instructing them where to hang streamers. When you asked what they were doing, Vanessa's reply was chilling in its confidence. "We're planning the shower here. It's the only space big enough." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a request. It was an announcement, as though your permission no longer mattered. James lost his temper then, slamming his hand on the table. His voice shook as he told them it had to stop. Vanessa's tears came instantly, her hand on her belly as she accused him of cruelty. Walter shouted over both of you, calling his son ungrateful, accusing him of being poisoned by your influence. The room erupted, voices colliding, accusations flying. It was no longer a disagreement, it was a fracture. That night, you and James sat together in the car, parked outside the house you had once loved. He held your hand, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep living like this. We either take action now, or we lose everything." The following days became preparation. You spoke to a lawyer, carefully explaining the situation without exaggeration. The lawyer's advice was blunt. "This is your property. You have every right to decide who stays and who goes. Document everything, call the authorities if necessary, and be prepared for backlash." The word authorities echoed in your mind. It felt drastic, even cruel, to imagine police at your door. But as the days passed, the atmosphere grew more unbearable. Vanessa treated the house as though she were queen, directing James to carry boxes, asking you to buy groceries for her cravings. Walter reinforced her every demand, glaring at you whenever you pushed back. The most painful moment came when James' aunt visited unexpectedly. She stepped into the living room, her eyes widening at the sight of the nursery corner Vanessa had built. Vanessa introduced it proudly. "This is where the baby will sleep once he's born." The aunt looked at you with pity, as though you were an outsider in your own home. The humiliation burned hotter than anger. By then, you had gathered every piece of evidence you needed. The list, the change locks, the photographs of boxes, the recordings of conversations where Vanessa declared her intention to stay permanently, the texts inviting guests without your consent. Each item was a stone in the foundation of your case. One evening, as Vanessa napped on the sofa and your father watched television with the remote in his hand, you and James sat quietly in the bedroom. Between you lay the folder of evidence, thick with weeks of documentation. James looked at you, his face pale but resolute. "It's time," he said. You nodded. The decision was no longer about anger. It was about survival. It was about protecting the life you had built, the years of sacrifice, the sanctity of the space you had once called safe. It was about drawing a line so clear that even Walter could not pretend it didn't exist. The next morning, you woke with a clarity you hadn't felt in weeks. As the sun streamed through the window, you realized this was the calm before the storm. Whatever happened next would not be easy, but it would be final. The preparations were done, the evidence collected, the resolve unshakable. The house had been taken from you in spirit, but you were ready to reclaim it in truth. And though fear lingered in your chest, it was joined by something stronger: determination. Because when respect has been stolen and silence mistaken for weakness, there comes a moment when action is the only answer. And that moment was waiting, just beyond the horizon of tomorrow. The morning of reckoning arrived quietly. The folder of evidence lay ready, the lawyer's advice fresh in your mind, and James stood firmly by your side at last. When the officers knocked on the door, the sound echoed through the house like the tolling of a bell. Walter's face hardened as realization dawned.